there's a moment in life when you wonder, do animals actually remember us? Would that childhood dog you had still recognize your smell, your voice, after all these years? Most of us will never get a definitive answer to that question. But in 2008, two men named John Rendall and Anthony Bourke decided to find out. And the answer they received was so powerful, so visceral, that it changed the way the entire world views animal memory. The story begins in an unlikely place, a department store in London in the year 1969. Yes, you heard that right. A department store. Back then, Harrods sold everything. Literally everything. French perfumes, Persian rugs, rare jewels, and apparently African lion cubs.
Oh my goodness, it's real!
John and Anthony were two young Australians who had moved to London in search of adventure, the kind of experience you tell your grandchildren about decades later. They worked at a furniture shop called Sophisticat, a name so painfully 60s it hurts just to say it out loud. And it was there, among velvet sofas and brass lamps, that they had an absolutely insane idea. What if we buy that lion cub that's for sale at Harrods? Now, stop for a second and think about that. A lion, in London, in the basement of a furniture store. This wasn't just irresponsible, it was practically suicidal. But there was something about that cub, something in those golden eyes, that made them ignore every shred of common sense. They named him Christian. Christian, the London lion.
So small. Look at those big eyes.
And for one entire year, that animal lived a life no lion had ever lived. He walked the streets of Chelsea wearing a makeshift leash. He played in the garden of the local church, where the reverend, inexplicably, allowed him to run free among the Victorian graves. He slept on the shop sofa, purring like a gigantic house cat, while John and Anthony watched television.
No, this is where it really gets going.
But lions aren't house cats. And as Christian grew, it became clear that this arrangement couldn't last forever. His paws became the size of dinner plates. His jaws could crush bones with the same ease you'd snap a pencil. And although he had never hurt anyone, although he still played with John and Anthony like a clumsy puppy, there was an instinct growing inside him. An ancient call, coded into his DNA over millions of years. The call of the savanna. That's when they met George Adamson. If you've ever heard of the book, Born Free, or the film of the same name, you already know part of George's work. He was a British conservationist who lived in Kenya, dedicated to reintroducing captive-raised lions back into the wild. He had done it with Elsa, the lioness immortalized by his wife, Joy Adamson. And now, he agreed to do the same with Christian.
We're honored, Mr. Patterson.
In August 1970, John and Anthony flew Christian to Africa. They spent weeks with him in Kora, a remote reserve in Kenya, watching as George taught the lion to hunt, to establish territory, to become what he always should have been, wild. And then came the goodbye. Have you ever had to say goodbye to someone knowing you'd probably never see them again? John and Anthony did. They hugged Christian for the last time, felt the weight of that muscular body pressing against them, heard the deep purr that vibrated like an engine, and then they turned around and left. Christian stood in the savannah, watching them go. He didn't run after them. He just stood there, under the scorching African sun, as the two men who raised him disappeared into the horizon. 1 year passed, an entire year of silence. John and Anthony returned to their lives in London, but Christian never left their minds. They wondered if he was alive, if he was hunting, if he had found a pride, if he was happy. And then, in 1971, they received a letter from George Adamson. Christian was alive. More than that, he was thriving. He had established his own territory, formed a small pride with other lions in the region. He was, in every sense, a wild lion now. But George mentioned something else in the letter, something that made John and Anthony's hearts race. He said, "I don't know if Christian will remember you, but if you want to try, you're welcome to visit him."
This is our chance. Let's do it.
The question hung in the air like smoke. Would he remember? John and Anthony returned to Kenya.
On the horizon, Marcus.
They flew thousands of miles, crossed oceans and continents, carrying a fragile hope and a borrowed video camera. George took them to the area where Christian had last been seen.
It's breathtaking.
It was an arid landscape, punctuated by twisted acacias and reddish rocks. The heat was suffocating, the kind of heat that makes the air ripple and distort. And then, on top of a rocky formation, they saw him. Christian was magnificent. His mane had grown, thick and dark, framing that face they knew so well. He was bigger, more muscular, every inch of him screaming apex predator. And for a moment, he just looked at them, his golden eyes fixed on the two men standing about 50 meters away. There was no immediate recognition, no instant joy. There was only that piercing gaze, that cold assessment every predator makes before deciding if something is prey, threat, or irrelevant. John called his name, Christian. His voice trembled. You could hear decades of doubt in that single word. And then something changed. Something subtle, but unmistakable. Christian's ears tilted forward, his head cocked slightly, as if he were processing a sound he hadn't heard in a very long time. And then, slowly, he began to descend from the rock. He didn't run. He walked, each step measured, each muscle rippling under the golden fur. He approached slowly, and you could see the uncertainty in him too. As if he were trying to reconcile two versions of reality. The memory of two young men who raised him in London and the life he lived now, where humans usually meant danger. But then, about 10 meters away, something clicked. You could see it in his eyes. It was as if a long-locked door had suddenly been thrown open, releasing a flood of memories. The sofa at Sophisticat, the church garden, the endless play sessions. And suddenly, Christian wasn't walking anymore. He was running, full sprint, 250 kilograms of pure muscle and bone hurtling toward them at terrifying speed. This is the moment where your brain would scream at you to run, to climb the nearest tree, to do anything except stand there. But John and Anthony didn't move. They stood their ground, arms slightly extended, as this massive predator closed the distance in seconds. And when Christian reached them, he didn't pounce. He didn't attack. He reared up on his hind legs and wrapped his enormous paws around John's shoulders, pulling him into what can only be described as a hug. Watch that moment closely. Watch how Christian's face changes. His mouth is open, but not in aggression. He's making sounds, these deep, guttural vocalizations that lions only make with members of their pride. He's nuzzling John's face, rubbing his massive head against Anthony's chest, moving between them like he can't decide who to embrace first. His tail is whipping back and forth, and if you know anything about lion body language, you know what that means. Pure, unfiltered joy. But here's what gets me. What still gives me chills every time I watch that footage. It's not just the physical reunion. It's the precision of his memory. Because Christian doesn't just recognize them as familiar. He remembers exactly how they used to play. John reaches up and scratches behind Christian's ear, the exact spot he used to scratch when Christian was a cub. And Christian responds immediately, leaning into it, closing his eyes, making that deep, rumbling purr. It's muscle memory, emotional memory, the kind of memory that scientists, for decades, insisted animals weren't capable of. The video of this reunion was filmed in 1971, but it didn't go viral until 2008, when someone uploaded it to YouTube. And when I say viral, I mean it exploded. Millions of views in days, tens of millions within weeks. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. A wild lion, an apex predator who hadn't seen these men in over a year, embracing them like lost family. The comments section became this fascinating mix of skepticism and wonder. People wanted to believe it was real, but it seemed too perfect, too cinematic. Surely this was staged. Surely the lion was sedated or trained or somehow manipulated. But it wasn't. George Adamson, who filmed the encounter, confirmed that Christian was completely wild at that point. He had been hunting successfully, had killed prey, had established dominance over territory. This wasn't a tame lion pretending to be wild. This was a wild lion choosing connection over instinct, choosing memory over survival protocol. Let's talk about what that means for a second. Because the science of animal memory has evolved dramatically since 1971. We now know that many animals have what's called episodic memory, the ability to remember specific events and experiences. Elephants remember the locations of water sources decades after visiting them. Crows remember human faces and can hold grudges for years. Dogs can recognize their owners after extended separations. But lions? Lions were supposed to be different. They're solitary hunters in many contexts, territorial, aggressive. The prevailing wisdom was that their social bonds were purely functional, driven by mating and cooperative hunting, not by anything resembling affection or long-term attachment. Christian shattered that assumption. His reunion with John and Anthony proved that lions are capable of complex emotional memory, that they can form bonds that transcend mere biological utility. And here's the thing that really matters. He had a choice. When he saw those two men standing in his territory, he could have ignored them. He could have perceived them as threats and driven them away. He could have done what every survival instinct told him to do, which was maintain distance and dominance. But he didn't. He chose connection. He chose to remember. The footage shows something else too, something easy to miss if you're not paying attention. After the initial embrace, Christian leads them to meet his pride. He walks between John and Anthony, occasionally looking back to make sure they're following, exhibiting behavior that lions only show toward trusted pride members. He's not just remembering them. He's integrating them into his current social structure. He's saying, in the only language he has, these are my people. John and Anthony visited Christian one more time in 1972. By then, his pride had grown. He had cubs, a territory that stretched for miles, a life that was entirely his own. And once again, he remembered. Once again, he ran to them, embraced them, led them through his world like a tour guide showing off his home. But after that second visit, George Adamson advised them not to come back. Christian was becoming more territorial, more protective of his pride. The risk was increasing, not because Christian would intentionally hurt them, but because other lions in the area might perceive them as threats. So they said goodbye for the last time. And this goodbye was different because they knew it was final. Christian watched them leave, standing on the same rocky outcrop where they had first reunited. And according to George, after they were gone, Christian stayed there for hours, just staring in the direction they had walked. George said he had never seen a lion do that before. He said it looked like grief. Christian lived until 1985. He died of natural causes, an old lion by wild standards, having lived a full and successful life in the African wilderness. John and Anthony never saw him again after 1972, but they carried him with them forever. They wrote a book about their experience, updated it multiple times as new information about animal cognition emerged. They became advocates for wildlife conservation, using Christian's story to raise awareness about the intelligence and emotional capacity of animals. But I think the real legacy of Christian's story isn't just about animal intelligence. It's about the nature of memory itself. Because what Christian proved is that memory isn't just data storage. It's not just a survival tool, a way to remember where food is or who to avoid. Memory is the architecture of identity. It's how we construct meaning, how we maintain relationships across time and distance, how we hold on to the people and experiences that shape us. Christian remembered John and Anthony not because it helped him hunt better or survive longer. He remembered them because they mattered to him, because those months in London, absurd and impossible as they were, had left an imprint on his consciousness that the African wilderness couldn't erase. And here's what keeps me up at night. If a lion can do that, if a creature we've spent centuries dismissing as a purely instinctual killing machine can maintain emotional bonds across years of separation, what does that say about every other animal we've underestimated? What does it say about the dog you left at a shelter, the horse you sold, the cat you gave away when you moved? What memories are they carrying? What connections have we failed to recognize because we were too arrogant to imagine that animals could feel the same depth of attachment that we do? The internet made Christian famous, but I think people misunderstood why the video resonated so deeply. It wasn't just cute or heartwarming. It was existentially important. Because in that moment of reunion, in those few seconds when a wild lion chose to remember and embrace the men who raised him, we saw proof of something we desperately want to believe. That love and memory transcend biology. That connection matters more than survival. That we are all, human and animal alike, shaped and defined by the relationships we choose to maintain. Christian died 40 years ago. John and Anthony are old men now, carrying the weight of that impossible year in London and those brief, precious reunions in Kenya. The church garden where Christian played is probably a parking lot. Sophisticat is long closed. Harrods doesn't sell lion cubs anymore, thank God. But the video remains. And every time someone watches it, every time they see that massive lion sprint toward those two men and pull them into that embrace, Christian's memory lives again. Not just his memory of John and Anthony, but our memory of him. Proof that what we love, we carry forever. And what loves us, remembers.
Good times, Cooper. Good times.